An atheist, a magician, and a worship leader walk into a church. Stop me if you've heard this one. This is not even a joke, though. It's something I witnessed and literally participated in on Tuesday evening. But let me back up a little bit. When we prepare these worship videos to show here and to use for our online services, it's a whole production. We're playing and singing the music, but we're also recording that music into a computer with 15 or 16 separate audio tracks so that I can adjust the mix after we record. And we usually have 6 or 7 cameras running to get multiple angles. Although camera is a strong word, it's actually, it's 2 camcorders, my iPad, my iPhone, my old iPhone, and an off-brand GoPro action camera that I borrowed from my mom. But we make it all work. The only problem has been that I'm the guy who knows how to run the gear. Or at least the guy who's not afraid to push all the buttons to see what happens. But I'm also the guy who's leading the worship team. And after every 1 or 2 songs, I have to run around the room and stop recording on every camera and then start again. Because if I let the videos go too long, the audio and the video get out of sync, and then I'm going to be up till 3 in the morning on Saturday trying to get things edited. And it ends up looking like bad lip syncing. And that's, when the audio and video are off by like a half a second, oh, that's so frustrating to watch. It drives me crazy. But I also have to check on the computer to make sure it's still recording. Because recording that many audio tracks at the same time is taxing to even very powerful computers. And there have been probably 3 times since May that we finished the set, and I went back to find that the computer was not recording. In which case, we have to do it all over again. So now I check it after every song. And we do 6 songs, because if we're setting up all this stuff, let's try to get 2 weeks worth done at one time, right? Be efficient. And so it winds up being a lot of running around, and usually by the end of the recording session, I'm not just tired, I'm almost dead. Like I'm just covered in sweat, and like I get shinier and shinier as the videos go, you can tell. And like I'm exhausted. And that's when it's time to pack up the gear and take it all home to make the sanctuary at Landisville presentable for Sunday morning, because the angles that you can't see in these videos, it looks like a Radio Shack exploded. There's tripods everywhere, and there's random cameras popping up, and there's even a giant television wedged between the pews that we use as our confident monitor. A few weeks ago, Jen and I got home from recording. She looked at me, and I guess I looked really great, because she said, "You can't keep doing this." And I said, "Don't tell me what I can't do." And she explained that she was serious, and it was wearing me down. So we put out a call for help, and some people rose to the occasion. So this past Tuesday, an atheist, a magician, and a worship leader walked into a church. The magician is named Eric. He attends over at Landisville. He has a really good eye, and he made this week's video look so much better. I don't know if you noticed, like the close-ups and the motion shots, that was all Eric. I thought they looked so great. He also did some color correction on the cameras, which made things look better too. The atheist is my friend Tom. I gotta tell you about my friend Tom. Spiritually, we are at opposite ends of the spectrum. But he's one of my best friends, and he is a phenomenal musician. And he was willing to come and help run the audio on the computer in exchange for a 2-liter bottle of Diet Dr. Pepper, which I think he drank the entire thing while we recorded those 6 songs. So the worship team, they all knew the magician because he attends at Landisville, but they didn't know the atheist. So I introduced him to the team as my friend Tom, the filthy heathen. And it got awkward for a second, and finally somebody on the worship team said, "Filthy? Really?" And in the back of the room, Tom laughed and he said, "Oh, the filthiest." When I initially asked Tom to help with the recording, I think that he thought I was asking him to help record my band and not the worship team, just based on some of the questions he was asking. So I texted him later, and I said, "I should also say that this is for my worship team. So if that changes your decision, no harm, no foul. Because I didn't want him to be uncomfortable or feel weird or anything like that. And he replied, I got no problem with Jesus using my stuff. Great. So I gave him the lineup. 3 vocal mics, trumpet, saxophone, drum kit with 6 mics on it, bass, guitar, 2 keyboard channels, 1 for the left and 1 for the right. A few hours later, he texted me again with this question. Do y'all sound good? Because the track lineup makes me think you guys have a clue. Because as a musician, he knows that the more parts you have working together, the harder it is to get everything working together and sounding like it all belongs together. So I told him, actually, we're not too bad. Because we're all working toward the same goal, making this sound as good as possible for the glory of God. And in that mix, nothing is more important than anything else. The drummer has to keep the beat. But if I'm playing the guitar in the wrong key, it's going to sound bad. If I play in the right key, but the trumpet squawks out a noise that sounds like a goose choking on a duck, it's going to sound bad. I'm not saying he does that, by the way. And I did like how some of the close-ups really brought out the red in the trumpeter's face. But if one of the vocalists decides to sing a different song altogether, it's going to sound bad. But we don't do that stuff. And it's not just because we're trying to make a good song. There are musical groups out there who are trying to make good songs, but they're stomping all over each other. Because in some bands and in some worship teams, everybody wants to be first. And I know this because I play guitar. And guitarists are egomaniacs. Every guitarist, every single guitarist does the same dirty trick. I'm going to tell you what happens. I know this because I do it. During sound check, the sound guy's checking levels. This happens in churches, this happens in bars, anywhere you play guitar, this happens. You're setting your levels, and the sound guy will say, does that sound good? The guitarist will get it. Yeah, it sounds pretty good, but the guitarist is only turned up to about 80 to 85%. Because when the show starts, we're going to turn it up just a little bit more to get that full sound. Because the guitar should be the thing you hear the most, right? Because guitars are awesome. But the drummer is also playing harder than he did at sound check. And I think the bass player might have turned up a little bit. And all of a sudden, we're not collaborating anymore. We're competing. Now, I've been in bands and in worship teams like that, and it's not fun. Because there has to be a trust and a respect among the members of the team. We have to trust each other to play our assigned part and know that it's all going to fall together if we do that. And I found that it takes a lot more than just musical talent to make that happen. The things that happen off stage are more important than what happens while we're playing the music. Because we have to trust each other. We have to respect each other. And we have to honor each other. A few weeks ago, we started our worship rehearsal, and I had the team sit in their regular spots on the platform. And then I went down and I sat in the first pew. And I said to the team, we are going to do a reverse roast. Now, do you know what a roast is? Yeah, comedians love to do this. One person sits in the hot seat and everybody takes turns making fun of them. We did a reverse roast. I sat in the hot seat and I went across the platform and I told each member of the team something that I appreciate about them, something specific, something unique to that person. And we probably had our best rehearsal ever that evening because honor was hanging in the air. When we honor each other, good things happen. Now, if you haven't guessed by now, this morning's one another is honor. The Bible tells us to honor one another. Honor is a weird word. It's not something that comes very naturally to those of us who have come up in the modern American spirit of individuality and self-reliance. It means to hold others in respect and admiration, or to give special recognition to them. But it's not about special occasions. Often we think of medals and parades and ceremonies when we think of honor. But it's the everyday little things, too. I honor my wife by loving her and being faithful to her. I honor my boss by doing what's asked of me without complaining where he can hear me. I honor the rest of my worship team by playing my part to the best of my ability. This morning's text is from 1 Corinthians. Now, just to make everything more confusing, the book of the Bible that we call 1 Corinthians is actually the second letter Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. And there was another letter that he may have written between what we call 1 Corinthians and what we call 2 Corinthians. So there may actually be up to 4 Corinthians, but we only know about 2 of them. You don't need to know any of that for this morning. I just find it interesting. Now, Corinth was a happening place. These days, Corinth is mostly ruins. But in its day, Corinth was like New York City, Atlantic City, and Vegas all rolled into one. Like, what happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. Corinth was a land bridge between 2 other regions. That little red dot there, that's Corinth. See how it's on that narrow strip? There's a word for that in geographical terms. It starts with an I, but I can never pronounce it right, so I'm not going to try. But that meant that any trade between these 2 regions had to go through Corinth. And that meant that Corinth had a lot of money. And it was also a port city. You see the water on both sides of it. So there were often people in town who weren't planning on staying, but they had a lot of money, and they were looking for a good time. Again, what happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. Corinth was part of Greece, and it was a very Greek city in terms of worldview and culture. And this is where Paul planted a church somewhere around the year 50. Now, there was really no Jewish culture or Jewish thought in Corinth before that. Other churches where Paul had planted had access to the writings of Moses and the prophets and much of what we now call the Old Testament. So there was some context for ideas like a Messiah or God's wrath or even the idea of one single God. But Corinth had none of that. They worshipped many gods, and their favorite was Aphrodite. They even had a temple to Aphrodite. That's what it looks like these days. To give you an idea of what the culture was like, Aphrodite's temple had a steady supply of temple prostitutes. I'm not going to go into detail about what a temple prostitute does, but if you have any imagination at all, you could probably make a pretty accurate guess. So this is where Paul planted a church. And he wrote this letter to them later, when he heard that things weren't going well in the church. People were quarreling and fighting with each other. There was rampant and open sexual immorality. They were listening to bad doctrine and incorrect ideas about God and about faith. And they were drifting away from the truth of the gospel. They were losing the idea that Jesus is the central aspect of our faith. Things were bad. But what's really interesting about the book of 1 Corinthians is that with all that stuff going on, the sexual immorality, the false teaching, the infighting, and all of that, Paul decides that the best way to tackle these issues is to start with one simple idea: unity. He tells the Corinthians that they, and we, need to be united in our faith, that we need to work together to mature in our faith and to continue in our journey with Jesus. We can't be at each other's throats and arguing about doctrine and theology and which preacher is best. That's something they were doing in Corinth. In the very first chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul mentions that he's heard about the Corinthians saying to each other, I follow Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I follow Peter, which sounds dumb until you realize that we do the exact same thing today. We're not arguing about Peter and Paul, but we will happily take shots at each other over Rick Warren or Rob Bell or Andy Stanley or Franklin Graham. So we're no different today. And that's why Paul's letter to the Corinthians is still relevant to us today. See, Paul knew that all the other stuff, the false teaching, the sexual immorality, all of that, none of it was going to be solved until the people in the Corinthian church learned to honor each other, to lift each other up, and to work together. So that is the backdrop of 1 Corinthians. Paul is trying to build up the church in Corinth by encouraging unity. And in chapter 12, he starts to use this analogy of the church as a body. We saw some serious Mr. Potato Head action in the Shine Kids video this morning. And I think that Mr. Potato Head is a great way to explain the importance of body parts working together. By the way, recording the video Friday night, I should have had some behind the scenes stuff because it was hilarious. I'm in front of the camera, or behind the camera rather, trying to do the voices and reading the script while Jen was under a table holding them up, trying to remember which character was in which hand. It was, when it was over, I looked at her and I said, did you ever think our lives would be like this? So yeah, Mr. Potato Head. If I take Mr. Potato Head's tongue, okay, and I put it in his ear hole, it fits. It fits. But it's not going to look right. If I take his ear and I put it in his eye hole, it fits. But it's not going to look right. Actually, he won't be able to look right on anybody. But let's take a look at chapter 12, verses 14 through 26 of 1 Corinthians. Yes, the body has many different parts, not just one part. If the foot says, I am not a part of the body because I am not a hand, that doesn't make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear says, I'm not part of the body because I am not an eye, would that make it any less a part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? Or if your whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. How strange a body would be if it had only one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. In fact, some parts of the body that seem weakest and least important are actually the most necessary. And the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with the greatest care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen, while the more honorable parts do not require this special care. So God has put the body together such that extra honor and care are given to those parts that have less dignity. This makes for harmony among the members, so that all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. Now I want you all to close your eyes. Now take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Keep your eyes closed. Another deep breath in. Another deep breath out. Now I want you to take one more breath in and I want you to hold it. And I want you to use your left ear to breathe. And I want you to use your right ear to see. We're going to give it about 20 minutes. We're going to see how many people end up blind and breathless. You can open your eyes. You can't do it. Well, I shouldn't. Did anybody manage to do that? Okay, if you had, then we have to have a very long conversation. Each part of your body was designed with a specific purpose. That part works best when it's doing what it was designed to do, and the whole body works best when each part is doing what it was designed to do, and the church is the same way. Each of us was designed to play a part in the church. Some of us preach, some of us sing, some of us do tech stuff, some of us work with kids, some of us count money, some of us pray. But the church works best when each of us does our part. And I'm talking about the global capital C church, not just Real Life Church of God, although us too. As I read through these verses over and over, I had Mr. Potato Head standing on my desk watching over me. There it was. And I would read the passage, and I would look at Mr. Potato Head. I would read the passage, and I would look at Mr. Potato Head. And I realized something unexpected. Something surprising, something maybe even shocking. I realized that Mr. Potato Head was the key to this morning's message. Stay with me. On Friday evening, Jen and I spent a lot of time playing with Mr. Potato Head to make that Shine Kids video. We had this whole plastic bin of body parts. that we had to sort through to build the characters that we needed for the skit. And it's really easy to put together a Mr. Potato Head if you don't care how it looks, or you don't care if it can balance or anything like that. But to get a fully functional Mr. Potato Head that also doesn't look like nightmare fuel, you have to put everything together just right. And I think that the Apostle Paul and Mr. Potato Head have 3 lessons about honoring each other this morning. So let's back up to 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and look at verses 14 through 21. Yes, the body has many different parts, not just one part. If the foot says, I am not a part of the body because I am not a hand, that doesn't make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear says, I am not part of the body because I am not an eye, would that make it any less a part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? Or if your whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where he wants it. How strange a body would be if it had only one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. Have you ever looked at Mr. Potato Head's mustache? He's not Mr. Potato Head without the mustache, right? Mr. Potato Head without the mustache would be like me with hair, right? It just wouldn't look right. The mustache is like a fundamental part of Mr. Potato Head's identity. But, you want to know something? There's no mustache hole. Like there's ear holes and eye holes and arm holes, but there is no hole for the mustache. The mustache hangs from the nose post, I guess you would call it. Hangs on there like that. Just like the eye can't say, I don't need you, and the head can't say, I don't need you, we can't say, I don't need you to each other. Because honor means needing each other. Whether I'm preaching or singing, you can't hear me unless someone is running sound, right? Whether it's Brian back at the board or my friend Tom, the filthy atheist. I can't do it all on my own. I tried. It didn't go well. My wife convinced me it wasn't healthy. Honor means needing each other, just like Mr. Potato Head's mustache needs his nose. Paul writes this in verses 22 to 24. In fact, some parts of the body that seem weakest and least important are the most necessary. And the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with the greatest care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen, while the more honorable parts do not require this special care. So God has put the body together such that extra honor and care are given to those parts that have less dignity. Every Mr. Potato Head, and these come in a variety of designs and styles and sizes. There's little potato heads, there's Star Wars potato heads, we found a clown potato head, it was terrifying. All sorts of stuff. But every single Mr. Potato Head has a very strange but extremely necessary part. And as Jen and I were trying to assemble our cast on Friday night, I kept finding potato bodies that were missing this essential piece. I don't know if it has an official name, but I call it the gluteus maximus flapicle. This is a highly scientific term that I made up. See, Mr. Potato Head was designed to hold all the pieces inside the potato. And you can store them securely by fastening the gluteus maximus flapicle. The gluteus maximus flapicle is not a highly honored part of the Mr. Potato Head experience. It's not a dignified accessory to the fun, but it's really important. So we have to be careful not to lose it, or all the parts fall out and scatter. See, honor means protecting each other. Honor keeps us together and helps to keep us from being scattered and falling apart from each other. So how do we protect each other in the church? Well, one way I try to protect you is by not bringing a message or leading a song that's contrary to Scripture. Part of my job is making sure that everything presented up front aligns with God's Word. We protect each other by praying for each other. Right now, we can protect each other by wearing these masks that nobody likes to wear. But if we can honor each other by wearing them, that's great. Now finally, in verses 25 and 26, Paul says this. This makes for harmony among the members, so that all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. That's a principle that Paul also wrote about in Romans. In Romans 12:15, Paul said, "Be happy with those who are happy, and weep with those who weep." This is our third lesson this morning. Honor means carrying each other. Watch what happens if I remove Mr. Potato Head's feet. If I can. There we go. Now I'll just put him back here where he was. See, having no feet makes Mr. Potato Head much less fun. Not a fun toy. And we have to carry each other, too. We have to bear one another's burdens and lift each other up. If someone is walking down a hard road, we walk with them. If someone is struggling with a problem that's too heavy for them to carry on their own, we each lift some of it up. And if someone has a reason to celebrate, then we all have a reason to celebrate. We have to let each other in and share what's going on in our lives so that we can carry each other the way the church is supposed to carry each other. None of us was designed to walk through this life alone. You were not made to journey alone. We were all built to walk with Jesus, and we were all built to go together. So let's show honor to each other by protecting each other and carrying each other. Because we need each other. We need each other like Mr. Potato Head's mustache needs his nose. Let's pray.